is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from a clubhouse hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the editor-in-chief of Unwinnable.com. I once asked him if he ever did any child acting, and he said, yeah, I once acted like I was interested in sports. Stu Horvath.
It was a very brief moment in time.
How you doing, Stu?
Pretty good. How are you?
I can't complain. So what are we going to talk about today?
Well, I don't love sports, but do you know what I do love?
What do you love?
I love a good dungeon generator.
Ooh, I love a good dungeon generator as well.
Yeah, so what I have on tap here is Central Casting Dungeons, released in 1993 from Task Force Games. One of a series of books that Task Force put out, sort of just generating content. You could use this for any kind of fantasy role-playing game.
Central casting, like in Hollywood central casting?
Yeah, so like one is an NPC generator.
Really? So like this one actually generates dungeons, but if they were going to say cast me, it would be as an erstwhile Fonzarelli.
Yes. If Fonzie is in this dungeon, he's played by Hambone John McGuire.
I feel really good about this.
It's a pretty meaty book. It runs almost 200 pages. It's basically a, expanded, thought-out version of the first appendix in the Dungeon Master's Guide, the random dungeon generator where you roll dice and it tells you how to string together the rooms.
And in this instance, when you roll those dice, you have pictures of what the dungeon rooms look like for you to kind of draw out on your map.
Yeah, and there's a ton more detail in here because they have the space. So it's like they have rooms of different types and what their purposes are and atmospheric modifiers. This kind of stuff I find endlessly fascinating and useful. People could make more dungeon generators forever, and they'll always be different because it'll always be giving you more stuff to enter into your randomized matrix, right?
Yeah.
I find making dungeons a quiet, meditative pursuit.
Oh, yeah. Give me some graph paper and give me some time alone.
Yeah, and I think that, like, when I'm making a dungeon for a game, it's different. I have a set of things that I want to accomplish with the scenario that we're going to play, and usually there's like narrative stuff that reinforces, where we're going and why it's there and, stuff like that. But if you just need to throw something together or you don't know what to do for your session, you could use a book like this and let the dice lead you.
I really like that idea because often, as a dungeon master, you kind of run out of ideas sometimes.
Yeah.
Especially if you're playing with the same gaming group over and over and over again. Like,
yeah, on the reg, like every week, it's just like, oh man, I don't know where we're going this week.
Right. And then you're like, did I do that one already?
Yeah.
And here it's like the Sears Wish book for dungeon rooms. You just kind of go to a certain page, and boom, now we have this dungeon, and this is what this dungeon room does.
Yeah, just flipping through, you have the farrier's room, the spellcaster's laboratory, an oracle room, painter room, and each of them has like a set of like little things that you could use to customize them so that no two will ever be the same,
That's cool.
Yeah, and it's just like, I never would have thought to like have some of these rooms like an exhibition room. Okay, like that changes the character of the whole place because it's okay. Like there's some sort of like gallery room or performance space. Like, oh, well, maybe this is like a castle or maybe this is like a tavern or where are we? What are we doing here?
Yeah, it kind of throws a nice wrench in the works because it really is easy to fall back on the normal tropes of a dungeon.
Yeah.
And also kind of helps you in a way where it helps you flesh out the story more because it kind of makes you think, okay, so I have this area, but now I have a gallery room. Like, well, why would I have a gallery room? And I can see in a lot of instances how that would help you to develop even the NPC characters.
Yeah.
Because it gives them motivation.
Yeah, well, somebody's collecting art, right?
Yeah, and why are they collecting art? Maybe one of the paintings is cursed.
Oh, they're always cursed.
I know, all the good ones are.
And in that way, the randomization does all the heavy lifting, right? Then you get to have the fun job of trying to make sense of it all. It's just such a fun way to go about it. What we consider a good dungeon in a role-playing game, like what is that in terms of like a real space? Who built that in the real world? Like that doesn't exist.
Right.
Like a death trap with monsters living in it.
Yeah, there was one man who did that in real time, and his name was H.H. Holmes.
Yeah. And even then, it wasn't underground.
No, it's kind of in plain sight.
In terms of the game, we're obsessed with these sort of vast underground systems, and it's just like there's no touchstone for that in the real world. And like for me personally, like I'm always trying to like, especially when you visit a castle, like I like to look up what actual rooms in a castle are and try and have my layouts make sense, even if it's just for me.
Right.
That's the way my brain likes things.
Huh.
But that very rarely equals an interesting time for exploration, you know?
Well, because now you make me think of it in a different way. And it's something that kind of comes and goes from my mind from time to time. But, like, who built this shit?
Yeah.
Like, when you think we were in this dungeon room and the floor is made of, like, stone and it's carved by dwarves, you're like, okay, so pause. This person or creature that we're here to kill, they had a staff of dwarves build this lair. Like, in fantasy role playing, obviously you don't need permits for it, but like when you think about like real world application, you try to put an addition on your house. Hell, you try to rebuild the steps on your back deck. You need to get a permit for that from the city. Like, at what point, even in fantasy, would the town constable or like the local lord not recognize, wow, all these dwarfs keep going into this cave and bringing all this stone in and working really odd hours, and they're not really singing happy songs anymore because apparently they're like enslaved by this bugbear. Like, what the hell's going on here?
Well, I love the fact that like all of these underground construction projects never seem to, create the amount of debris that you would need. Like when you're digging underground, you need to haul that out.
Yeah.
There should be big piles of it, or there should be a quarry nearby. Like all of these things, like you never really think of that. And if you were to put that stuff in there, it would feel ridiculous in the context of the game, right?
Of course.
Like if outside like the crazy lich sorcerer's underground laboratory, there was just like, oh, well, that's all the dirt pile from all the dirt they hauled out from the dig.
Yeah. This is Eugene's construction dumpster. Just don't look at it. We just put all the refuse in there.
Yeah, there's a pile of pallets over there.
Yeah, there's like all this excess dirt covered by a tarp so it doesn't make mud when it rains.
Yeah, rusted earth mover.
God. And also, like, you think about it now, when you go into one of these dungeons, right? And you go there, you just put a whooping on the boss in the dungeon boss fight. And you're like, wow, man, this guy totally went down like a chump. Me and like my buddies, we're all like third level, and we just squash this dude. So if a bunch of us at third level, maybe 4, 5 tops, just put a whooping on this guy, how did he get like a whole army worth of dwarves to carve out this entire lair? Right? Because this is some serious construction going on here.
Dwarves are union, right?
They have to be.
I would think.
You would totally think, mithril, all that thing. And also, like, he doesn't have much treasure. You're like, well, how did he pay for it? Well, I guess all the money went into building this lair. It's like, did he kill all the guys who did the construction, or did he let them go? Like, God, now I'm like very curious.
And like, what happens after you kill the guy? You never hear about an adventurer like boarding up the entrance on the way out. That's a hazard. Some kid could wander in there.
Oh, yeah. And immediately you're going to be like taking like, some real constitution damage because all the bodies are going to be rotting and corrupting. So you're just going to get like the stink wafted in your face.
Seriously.
Like, really, God, we really don't think about these things when we think about dungeons.
No. And, we have the copper mines in town, or, nearby. They're not in this actual town, but they were historically. It was a bigger town at one point. And yeah, we had the big copper mines, and it was the site of the first steam engine in the United States.
Very interesting.
Brought over by Benjamin Franklin to pump out the water that was flooding in.
Okay.
Because they dug too deep.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. The dwarves of Moria got a Balrog. We got a steam engine. Anyway, I guess that's actually a bonus. But yeah, so they sealed it, years ago because they ran out of copper. And I don't know if you remember in the 90s or late 80s, they were started to have sinkholes all over North Arlington.
Yeah.
And like people's backyards were disappearing because the air vents were collapsing that they dug out so that there was airflow.
Yeah.
And it was just like some guy's pool just disappeared.
I can just imagine some kid watching Buffy and they're talking about the Hellmouth opening up and they look at the backyard and, whoa, where's the gate?
Yeah. But like you never think about that stuff in context of dungeons, especially like Waterdeep has like this crazy ass dungeon underneath. It's like Waterdeep would be falling into that all the time.
Yeah. And how did nobody notice that this thing was getting built?
Exactly. I mean, I guess there's portals and stuff, but whatever.
A construction of that magnitude under the city?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, geez. So when was this book published?
Well, I think we've gotten off the subject. Yeah, it was published in 1993, which I think is fairly early for this sort of robust, system agnostic kind of supplement. I love this book. It's so good. The art inside by one Darla Hallmark. I've never heard of her before, but she has like a really great kind of retro style. And I don't want to bag on anybody, but there's a couple places that her art, let's say, emulates the style of some classic Dungeons & Dragons art, which is pretty great. If you recall in the red box, the great picture of the human warrior going into the dungeon entrance.
Right.
And he's like got the lantern and he's looking up and it's a big dragon maw.
Other than R-Swipe?
Yeah. It's all in her own style. It's not like a trace.
Right.
But like she's definitely like, oh, we'll just call back to that. In the expert box set, there's an illustration of a cleric with a mace and a shield, and she's sort of in a really interesting posture that doesn't look natural.
Okay.
And you would totally know it if you saw it. I think she's got wings on her head. And that same posture is reused here. So much of like my youth was spent, emulating those illustrations. I drew them in my notebooks in school constantly.
Yeah.
I just love it when that occasionally filters into a published role-playing product because it just feels like a full circle thing to me.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
And also, borderline thievery, but what can you do?
Yeah, I mean, like,
It's a callback.
Yeah.
Air quotes. So how many volumes of this book were produced?
So there's definitely 4 central casting books. It's Dungeons, there's Heroes for Tomorrow, which is, future stuff. There's Heroes Now, which is modern stuff. And then there's Heroes of Legend, which is fantasy characters. And that's basically it. There's also some murky overlap with the Grimtooth's Traps books. I'm not sure if Task Force Games is part of like the Flying Buffalo, Tunnels and Trolls sort of umbrella, if this was like one of the small studios that was associated with that. But there is some overlap. They definitely put out Grimtooth's Traps 8, and that's ATE, not the number 8.
That sounds nefarious.
Oh, yeah. I can't believe that we've not done a Grimtooth episode. We got to put that on the list because the Traps books are ridiculous and awesome.
I like a good trap.
Oh, yeah. Well, these are not good traps. These are evil, vicious traps that will turn your players against you. They'll murder you.
Well, we don't want that.
No, I mean, like, what they are is just really super evil traps that, like, if you were making a trap, you'd be like, well, this is the kind of fuckery that I would really put in a dungeon, And, like, the truth of the matter is it's just like all of this talk that we've had about, like, realistic dungeons and things you don't think of. It's like the same thing applies to traps. Like, traps in dungeons are stupid. Like, they're not actually designed to kill you. They're designed to inconvenience you.
Right.
If a trap was filled with deadly traps, you wouldn't go there. Like, it wouldn't be fun to play.
Yeah, definitely not. That's a surefire way to lose friends and alienate people.
There's one that's like a telescope. It looks like a really nicely made telescope.
Oh,
and as soon
no.
as you put it to your eye, it shoots a dart into it. Oh. It's like, oh, man, that's so good. But, like, you guys would hate me if I did that.
Yeah. Thank you for not doing that.
Yeah, the funny thing about
That's sadistic.
Yeah. It's outside of the rules, too. Like, how do you account for that in Dungeons & Dragons rules? Like, you can't, because it's not technically blindness, because you still got one eye. I guess you get a -2 to everything. I don't know. It's headaches you don't need.
Yeah, as a DM or as a player.
Yeah. So central casting, the books are actually very expensive to find.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I was like I got this in a lot of books, and I was like, what is this weird generic thing? And then I read it, and I loved it. I was like, oh, I got to get the rest of the series. And I tried to find them, and they're impossible to find for like less than $70.
Ooh, that's steep.
It's like, whoa. So I guess that they're all really good.
Or just that the print runs were really small.
That too. But this one is actually an extremely good value. I think that if you could find this, I would snap it up. Even if you're not going to do a fully random generated dungeon, because that could kind of be a little bit tedious. You could definitely get yourself started and get, a seed for something that you wouldn't necessarily have thought of to kind of characterize your dungeon. It's really good. Really well done.
Very cool, Stu. So this was our episode on central casting dungeons. Stu, where can people find you?
They can find me every day on Instagram at Vintage RPG, posting stuff about old vintage role-playing game things.
As he's been known to do.
I started out real strong with that one, and I got shaky at the end. Nobody's perfect, Hambone. Where can they find you?
You could find me on Instagram at John Hambone McGuire for my daily adventures and some behind-the-scenes going-ons of the Vintage RPG podcast. You could also find me on the Twitter at Hambreaker, where I tweet about cute animals, I tweet about Dungeons & Dragons, and I tweet about professional wrestling. Check out my other podcast, My Thai Happy Hour. It's pop culture for weirdos wherever podcasts are found.
See, folks, that's how you do it. I can't do that. It's Hambone's special skill. It's built into his kit.
Yeah. I didn't even have to take a feat or anything. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dega West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.